caught with most of the game the next day. And yeah, it was cracking. It was some cracking scores.
Yeah, superb, and a great advert for Rugby League, and it was good for the people of Cumbria who are staunch Rugby League fans to get to witness. That. It was a sickly night as well. The weather was absolutely terrible, and they were a packed house. It was sold out, and credit to them. A little bit disappointing to see some of the comments that came out from the New Zealand camp post result, where they were complaining about the facilities and the drive and the pitch wasn't the best. Don't give any credit to any of that.
Well, Scotland managed to overcome it better than New Zealand, didn't they?
Exactly.
The key thing for Scotland, in terms of get away from just talk about the things we talked about last time, was the penalties was killing them against England.
Yeah,
they cut that out. They only had 5 in this game compared to 10 that the Kiwis gave away, and that made up for. Well, they went under 1,000 metres, Scotland, so.
Very rare that you see a team win by going under 1,000 metres.
Yeah, so to get a draw was a bit... And they were, scored a try less, obviously. So forcing New Zealand to score their tries out wide in the horrible conditions and being disciplined helped them a lot here. And when they still made errors, but when they made errors, it felt like they were making them more... at the right end of the pitch rather than putting themselves under pressure on exit sets and that sort of thing. The errors were better errors than what they had been making against, say, Australia, where they kept putting themselves under pressure early doors. Scotland were making chances, particularly in the first half, and then coughing them up a little bit, but giving the ball back right up there rather than on their own try line or in their own 40 metres or what have you.
Fantastic. Stats on this one, have you? Because obviously we don't get the stats packs, but have you been able to pick anything out? There was the media on this one.
There was a few strong performers. So obviously New Zealand rested a few players, but David Fusatua, he had 156 metres as well as his try. 4 clean breaks from him too, which is impressive. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Excuse me. Jesse Bromwich, 143 metres. He had a strong tournament, really, I suppose you would say. Tohu Harris, who in this game was in his more accustomed position of the back row, had 119 metres, 42 tackles with no misses from him. So a strong working performance there. For Scotland, Kane Linnett had 101 metres. I thought both centres were pretty strong and both wingers were threatening as well. Lachlan Coote didn't have anything on the stats as such, but I'd just point out that I think he was finally getting involved in the game in an attacking sense and looked better defensively. But 108 metres for Luke Douglas as well there, and defensively big numbers were put up by Luke Douglas with 40 tackles, so he was a strong performer.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was, a groundbreaking result in terms of the history of the Four Nations, which you alluded to earlier, with Scotland being that first team to take a point. So it really does. It is a remarkable performance from the Scots, wasn't it?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, feedback on this one. Paul Campbell got in touch. He simply says, "What a performance! I can't believe I missed it." Yeah, I think a few people might have missed out on this one.
Yeah.
It wasn't massively well publicised in terms of where it was being televised, and to be honest, I only just recalled that it was on, so managed to catch it. But Paul O'Brien, he said, "What a game, well played by Scotland. The reaction from Brough after he kicked that last conversion show what it meant to the team." Tyler Casfan said, "Terrific effort from the Scots. The grit and determination showed by the team was summed up perfectly in Danny Brough's face when he put that last kick over. Incredible passion that New Zealand couldn't match." And finally on this one, Lee Whitnell says, "A fantastic gutsy performance from the Scots with a big finish that had me on the edge of my seat, jumping up and down like a madman." Games like this are common in Rugby League, but we haven't seen anything like it so far in the Four Nations. Glad we got one at least. Yeah, it definitely get my vote for best game of the Four Nations, I would say. It was definitely I feel like the most exciting to watch. Possibly our first game against New Zealand, but that was tinged with frustration more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with that game, is it probably was the most competitive along with this one, but because the last 15 minutes were so crap from an England perspective, it's hard to enjoy it thinking back to it, whereas this one we can just soak in and enjoy, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of things that
and it gave us hope.
It did. It's the hope that kills you, I'm led to believe, Mark, as well.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that are crap from England, then the following afternoon, England went into their game against Australia knowing that a draw or any kind of win over the green and gold would get them into the final the following week at Anfield. It wasn't to be, however. The final score was England 18, Australia 36. England's tries coming from McGilvray, Widdop and Hall, with Gaz Widdop kicking all the goals. Australia, however, got tries through Ferguson, Inglis, Scott, Dugan, Gillett and Val Holmes, with Thurston absolutely peerless with the boots with 6 conversions. And in the end, it was a comprehensive victory from the Australians, but there's so much that could have gone better for England in terms of their own execution. I still feel like we were, in a large part, the architects of our own downfall, Mark. Most definitely. The first half an hour, we matched them every bit of the way, I felt. Mm-hmm. The people will talk about the kicking out from the penalties not reaching touch. It was 2 experienced NRL players that did that, Widdop and Hodgson, which kind of frustrates. The stupid penalties that were given away. There was one particularly I remember just before half time that kind of exacerbated the lack of reaching touch, and that was given away by Sam Burgess, so another one of our NRL products. Which just why basically senior players went missing a little bit, and other players, like the best player for me in an England shirt in the game was probably John Bateman. Mm-hmm. James Graham as well would say stood up and stood out, but a lot of the other players who you're looking for leadership didn't drive things home. They brought in Widdop and Brown to play halfback to put more control on the game. I thought Brown's early kicking game was diabolical, to be frank, and Widdop's was not much better. Yeah, exactly. In fact, no better, let's face it. Yeah. And that frustrated me, and it felt like Brown grew into it a little bit more, but you always knew at some point he was going to get pulled off for someone who was far more exciting and threatening, let's be fair. Well, that's it. I mean, Widdop and Brown were too similar a player. You needed the organiser and you needed the guy that's going to take the line on. Well, Kieran Brown can take the line on and does know how to run with the ball, but that's in a mid-table Super League side, not in the higher echelons of the sport. So it was baffling for me as a selection, really, given his age and given his the relative quality of the other players that were in the squad. I found it baffling that we'd wait for the biggest game of the tournament to give it a try. Really, it was a pretty ludicrous decision. Yeah, I mean, from my point of view. The other thing that stood out for me in this game was just how clever Australia were. They were far cleverer than we were as a side. There was the try from the scrum base where we just couldn't read the play. There was Matt Gillett's try as well was similar. The lines that they were running were just far too complicated for our defenders to understand what was going on and to get the right men in the right places. And we didn't. One stat that stands out is Australia had 6 retained kicks. They had 41 sets to our 37. We only had 1 retained kick. We basically, we were fairly there with them in the amount of opportunities we could have had if we'd have looked after, if we'd have put more pressure on and been more. Well, we like the incision that the Australians have when they're in attacking positions, and I think you can illustrate that with, I don't recall the exact numbers, but repeat sets were virtually identical at one point, fairly deep into the first half, and we hadn't made anything of that, and that's what got me worrying. And I think that's been something that's gone on throughout this Four Nations, is that when we've engineered these positions and we've got ourselves into places where we've got teams they're on their ankles and on their heels, and we're in a position to turn the screw. We've engineered these repeat sets and we don't execute. We don't have. Whereas Australia, you think every time they're in that position where they're inside, the 20 metre mark, the 15 metre mark, when they start spraying the ball about and putting the runners keep, everything starts overlapping. And you can almost see it coming. You feel like they're going to score almost every time. Whereas with us, it looks pretty simple, pretty one-up, pretty crash-bally, and then a kick to the corner. And it's pretty easy to defend against, and we don't look like we're going to do anything to bamboozle some very high-quality players in that Australian and at points the Kiwi team. But even when a play sort of breaks down for them and their options fall away, they still come up with something positive. The Cooper Cronk dropout that he forced
was symptomatic of that.
Yeah.
Like, he had sort of gotten off balance, gotten out of position, lost his runners, but still put a kick in that stopped dead in the in goal, so we had to force it.
Yeah.
We couldn't do anything else, and we wouldn't be able to do that.
No. And the thing is, they keep their heads as well. How many times, I know this is talking about yesterday more, but it's only because I can't immediately come up with an example of it, but it did happen in this thing. How many times did Blake Ferguson nearly get put into touch yesterday afternoon, but had the presence of mind to keep his foot in play and get the ball out the back door, and just have that cool head to keep the set alive and to keep the game flowing? We don't have that. If that had been an England player, we'd have been put into touch, or we'd have made some frightening leap for the line. Do you know what I mean? They've got that incision, but they've got that muscle memory, and they keep cool heads as well, and that's what makes them so difficult to beat if you're not completely on your game. And even by being off by, I would say, 5 to 7%, which is what we were, then you're going to get this kind of result every single time against the Australians. You've got to hit your KPIs. You've got to be at the top of your game. Otherwise, this happens.
Yeah, I mean, and their forwards made more of an impact off the bench. David Clement was the biggest metre maker in the game, 174 metres he made off his 19 carries. Tyson Frizzell had a couple of offloads when he came into the side as well. I thought he played really well when he came in. Boyd Cordner has had an outstanding tournament, I think. 136 metres in this one. 137 metres for Greg Inglis. When you know, your big players, they stand up, whereas, you know, whereas Hill got 68 metres, Hodgson gave away 4 penalties. I mean, Sam Burgess went over 100 metres, but he had errors and penalties in there too. He had six missed tackles. I just think there was too many players making too many mistakes, and they were big name players.
Yeah,
you know.
I actually feel like, I don't want to say we've gone backwards, but nominally in terms of improvement, the improvement you would have expected to see, given what I imagine is quite an expensive coaching appointment, hasn't happened. And I actually feel like we played better rugby under Steve McNamara in that last series against the Kiwis. Certainly for big portions of that.
I think it's harder to judge than just make a simple assessment like that, and I think the coach has to take some sort of blame, and his cast of thousands behind him have to take some sort of blame. But a lot of the buck rests on this defeat and the Kiwi capitulation on some of the senior players, some of the star names.
Yeah.
To be completely honest.
Yeah.
A little bit of it rests on the problem at halfback, that we just haven't got a halfback combination, but you can attribute the blame to that to Gareth Widdop for not stepping up as well. He's an experienced player now. He's won NRL Grand Finals. He's got a good contract.
Yeah.
He's seen as a top performer. Well, he won't be for much longer if he keeps going the way he's going in an England shirt. Then you've got we missed being able to select our world-class fullbacks, but then there's question marks over how world-class
they've
Sam
been
Tompkins
this year.
and Zach Hardacre would be at the moment. But
look, at the end of the day, Wayne Bennett has come in and he's on a serious wedge, and he had basically 2 jobs to do. Set on a halves combination, because he's not going to pull, you know, a Jonathan Thurston out of his hat that we didn't know existed. So you've got to work with what you've got. So settle on a halves combination and get that clicking. And whether that's through you directly coaching it or from the appointments that you make affecting that, get that done. And the second thing is instill self-belief in the team. Now, in his pre-match media stuff, he's talking about how the team lacks self-belief. Well, I'm very, very sorry.
He doesn't believe in them.
If he doesn't believe it, and he doesn't, that's his job, is to instill that in them. And he's not going to get an opportunity to do that between now and the next World Cup. It's not association football. There isn't 4 or 5 friendlies between now and the next World Cup where we can garner that momentum. There will be a limited build-up to 2017's World Cup that will curtail building that self-belief. And it's shocking to me that the person who spoke most positively about this England side in terms of saying things that could be parlayed into self-belief moving forward is fucking Mal Meninga, coming out and saying that this team is better than the sum of its parts and could do so much more. That's astounding to me. And I know that Wayne Bennett isn't the greatest with the media and that it's a project for him, but I can't see that this Four Nations is how he would have anticipated beginning that project, even if he thinks that simple participation and development is what needs to go on in this tournament to build to a better challenge in the World Cup. It beggars belief for me.
I genuinely think England should have been streets ahead of New Zealand in this tournament.